Welcome to Spooky Halls. On tonight's episode, Mrs. Munchhausen by Girl from the Crypt. Darren was a pale, timid kid. He'd always have his meds and his inhaler with him wherever he went. His mother was a complete opposite. She was large and fat, kind of ugly too. She always reminded me of a witch. She scared the living daylights out of 8-year-old me. Every time I would come to pick up Darren to play, she would scowl at me in the most hateful of ways, standing on her porch waiting for Darren to come out while this mountain of a woman was towering above me. Always felt like I was standing in a courtroom. The mean, beady-eyed judge snarling down at me. Relief would only set in when Darren would finally squeeze his skinny body past her through the doorway and we'd run off to the playground together. I don't remember ever meeting his dad. I was never really able to remember Darren's mom's name. It was a longer one. Foreign, I think. It never really caught her attention, seeing as I tried to avoid her anyways. But it did bother me. Whenever Darren would remind me of it, it would only take 5 minutes for me to forget it again. Sooner or later, I took up a habit of simply calling her what my parents and most of the other adults called her when referring to her. "Hey, who's that kid in our yard?" my dad would ask. "That's Darren, the son of the lady who lives down the street. You know, in that smaller brick building," my mom would answer. "Oh," my dad would shoot her a knowing look and then add, "Mrs. Munchhausen. Mrs. Munchhausen." I don't know why, but that stuck. I know it wasn't her real name, but part of me wondered why mom and dad called her that. But I never questioned it. As a kid of that age, you've got other things on your mind. I guess I was just happy to finally know a way to refer to her. I started using the name Mrs. Munchhausen quite frequently. Never in front of her, though. I was careful not to. One day, it was the last week of summer holidays, I made my way over to Darren's place. Like I had done so many times before, I rang the doorbell, listened to the heavy stomping footsteps of Mrs. Munchhausen approach from inside, and the door began to unlock.
"What do you want?"
she barked. "Is Darren home?" I asked politely. Just like I had so many times before. Mrs. Munchhausen opened the door fully. She now wore a satisfied sneer on her face.
"Yeah, he is. But he doesn't want to see you anymore."
What? I was puzzled. Darren was my friend. Why wouldn't he want to see me? Was he mad at me?
"You heard me right. He says you're a shitty little brat and that he wants you to leave him alone. Was about time for him to come to his senses, if you ask me. Run along now."
I stared at her in utter shock and confusion, not sure what to say.
"Did you hear me? I said leave. Go bother someone else. I don't have all day."
I felt my lips begin to quiver. I turned around and began walking away from her, turning around to look back at her colossal frame over my shoulder once or twice. She stood in the door frame, grinning at me. I ran home and went straight to my room. I was crying a little. What had I done to upset Darren? Why would he say such terrible things about me? I spent the rest of the week playing with the neighbors' kids, soothing my mind over the fact that I could talk things out with Darren when school would start again. We were classmates after all. But when the holidays came to an end, I found myself sitting in a class once again. There was no Darren to be seen. Okay, I thought, maybe he's sick. I waited another day, then another week, but Darren didn't show up. The teachers were confused too. Apparently, Mrs. Munchhausen had never called into the school to tell them why Darren had to stay off. It was then that I made my decision. Something was wrong about the whole thing. Darren would never miss school. He was one of these really super smart kids. Also, something about him suddenly hating me was fishy as well. We had always gotten along great, never had a single fight. I needed to talk to him, and if he wouldn't come to me, I would pay him a visit, whether that creepy witch wanted me to or not. That night, when I got home, I instantly started preparing myself. I left open the living room window on purpose so I would be able to leave without using the noisy front door. As soon as I was certain my parents were asleep, I quietly got up from my bed, grabbed my flashlight, and made my way downstairs. I was dressed in all black, which I thought would be helpful at the time. I climbed out of the window and walked down the street, thinking over my plan as I went. I had no guarantee of being able to enter the house, but it was still pretty warm out, so if I was lucky, Mrs. Munchhausen would have left a window open. I felt my heart started to beat faster when I suddenly arrived in front of the building. I walked around it trying to find an open window, and sure enough, there was one in the back. I remember thinking it was my lucky night. It was pretty low too. I could easily climb in. I had never actually been inside Darren's house before. I wasn't prepared for a wave of stench that hit me. It smelled like rancid foods, rust, and grease. I almost coughed, but I pressed my hand in front of my mouth just in time to stop myself. I was standing in what looked to be the living room. I could make out the shadowy silhouettes of a sofa and a TV. I turned on the flashlight, and its warm, way too bright beam illuminated the floor to my feet. I turned it off again. I didn't want to take any risk. I knew from what my friend had told me that his room was upstairs on the second floor. As I stepped out into the hallway, the sound of loud snoring caught my attention. Probably Mrs. Munchhausen. I made a mental note to avoid that room it was coming from and began creeping upstairs. By that time, I had reached the second floor. I was so nervous it felt like my chest was about to burst. Quietly sneaking along the hallway, I peered into every door until I finally found what looked to be the outlines of a sleeping child in one of the beds. Relieved to have found Darren, I slid inside and shut the door behind me. The snoring could still be heard, even through the closed door. I looked around. It was dark, but I could tell that the room I was in was rather strange. It didn't look like a kid's room. There were no toys of any kind, not even a desk or anything. Just the bed in the middle of the room and some shelves that seemed to be holding pill bottles of varied sizes. I snuck over to the bed and reached out to touch Darren's shoulder. "Darren," I whispered. "Darren, wake up." My friend groggily uttered something I couldn't quite understand and batted my hand away. "Darren, wake up, please," I insisted. "Come on, it's me." I turned on the flashlight and shone it onto my face. Finally, Darren opened his eyes and let out a quiet gasp upon seeing me. What are you doing here?" he hissed. "You have to leave quick before she finds you. Your mom's asleep." "Your mom? She told me you didn't want to see me anymore, and that you hated me. I wanted to talk to you in school, but you never showed up. I got worried," I quickly explained. "She's keeping you from going outside, isn't she?" Darren didn't reply, but I could see him nod. "I knew it," I muttered. "But don't worry, I'll get you out of here. Come with me." I looked around frantically. I could still hear the snoring loud and clear. "Hurry," I added. "We have to get going." It's not that easy," Darren whimpered. "What do you mean?" "Just get up and follow me." You don't understand my legs." I could hear he was beginning to sob. What's wrong?" Darren sat up, but something was wrong. It took him too long, and from the way he was wincing, I could tell that he was in pain. He slowly pulled off his blanket. As the beam of my flashlight traveled over his legs, I let out a gasp. They were broken, going off into completely different angles from the knee downward. I felt like gagging. Did she do this to you?" I whispered. Darren nodded once again. We had a fight. She wanted me to drink this really weird stuff. It was all yellow and it smelled disgusting, and I didn't know what it was. She said it was medicine, though. I said I wouldn't drink it, but she said I had to. She grabbed me and tried to hold my mouth open while pouring the yellow stuff into it. But I pushed her, and I tried to run away, but she got me. She carried me into the room, threw me into the bed, and then she took that hammer and his voice trailed off, and I felt my blood run cold. When we started to speak again, he sounded strangely numb and unfeeling. "She does that every month. She always gives me some new medicine. It's always something to drink, and she makes it herself. I can't stand it anymore. We both realized it at the same time. The snoring had stopped. A loud creaking could be heard from downstairs. Then stomping footsteps made their way up the stairs.
Darren, sweetie,
Mrs. Munchhausen's sickly, sweet voice called out.
are you talking to someone?
There was no time to hide. I turned off my flashlight and shoved it into my pocket before rushing over to Darren's window. It was already open. I knew there was a drain pipe outside. I swung myself out into the slightly cooler night air and grabbed a hold of the pipe. Clinging to the cold metal, I slowly let myself slide down to the ground. I was just in time. I could hear the door in Darren's room being open. "No, Mom, just to myself," I heard Darren answer, clearly trying to hide the fear in his voice. I think Mrs. Munchhausen said something too, but I was already too far down to make out what it was. The second my feet hit the ground, I dashed off. I sprinted all the way back home, crawled in through the window, and immediately ran for my parents' bedroom. "Call the police!" I remember shouting in between my gasps for air. My parents, dazed and confused, sat up in their bed, and my mom was about to say something to calm me down, but I simply kept screaming at them to call the police. "I was at Darren's place," I yelled. When I finally caught my breath, Mrs. Munchhausen broke his legs. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Mrs. Munchhausen was arrested. Darren was brought to a hospital. The police took the statements of my parents and me. The next day, my father set me down and explained to me how he had always known there was something strange about Darren's mother, but neither he nor my mom had ever any means to prove it. He said he had just assumed she was a harmless weirdo, a helicopter parent of sorts. "One more thing," he said, a stern look on his face. "Your mom and I weren't sure if we should tell you this, but I think you should know. The police searched her house, and they found human remains in her basement. She probably died before he was born, but Darren, he used to have a sister." Thank you for listening to this episode of Spooky Halls. If you've enjoyed this video, please make sure to check out our other videos and to subscribe. Thank you, and good night.